The black Mercedes pulled up to the grand entrance of the Serpentine Gallery on that warm June evening in 1994. Inside, Princess Diana sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, wearing what would become one of the most talked-about dresses in royal history. The off-the-shoulder black dress hugged her figure perfectly, its daring neckline a bold statement that would send shockwaves through the British establishment before the night was over. Diana had spent weeks planning this moment. Her marriage to Prince Charles was crumbling publicly, and tonight, while her husband appeared on television confessing his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles to millions of viewers, she would make her own statement. Not with words, but with fashion. The dress, designed by Christina Stambolian, had been hanging in her wardrobe for 3 years. She had always considered it too daring, too revealing for a future queen. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't thinking about being a future queen. The photographers' cameras began flashing the moment her foot touched the red carpet. Diana had expected this, but the intensity still surprised her. She straightened her shoulders and walked forward with the grace that had made her the most photographed woman in the world. Each step was deliberate, each movement calculated to project confidence she wasn't entirely sure she felt. Inside the gallery, guests turned to stare as she entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The cream of London society, people who had seen Diana hundreds of times at royal functions, looked at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the shy kindergarten teacher who had married the Prince of Wales 13 years earlier. This wasn't even the polished princess who had graced magazine covers around the world. This was a woman taking control of her own story. Diana moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to chat with friends and supporters. She laughed at jokes, posed for pictures, and seemed completely at ease despite the obvious attention her outfit was generating. But those who knew her best could see the steel in her blue eyes. This wasn't just a social appearance. This was warfare conducted with silk and sequins. The dress itself told a story of transformation. Christina Stambolian had originally designed it in 1991, shortly after Diana had started working with the Greek-Australian designer. The princess had loved the design but felt it was too bold for her position. She was still trying to be the perfect royal wife then, still hoping her marriage could be saved. The dress had waited in her wardrobe like a secret weapon, ready for the right moment. That moment came when Diana learned about Charles's television interview. The prince would appear on a documentary with Jonathan Dimbleby, admitting for the first time that he had been unfaithful to his wife. The interview was scheduled to air the same evening as the Serpentine Gallery Gala, an event Diana had committed to months earlier. Palace advisors suggested she cancel her appearance to avoid overshadowing the prince's confession. Diana had other ideas. She would not hide in shame while her husband publicly humiliated her. She would not give him the stage alone to tell his version of their story. Instead, she would appear at one of London's most prestigious social events, looking absolutely stunning, while his interview played on television screens across the nation. The contrast would be impossible to ignore. The morning of the gala, Diana had gone through several outfit options with her dresser. Conservative choices were presented first, safe dresses that would maintain royal dignity without causing controversy. But Diana kept returning to the black Stambolian dress. She held it up to herself in the mirror, seeing not just the woman she was, but the woman she was becoming. The dress was more than clothing. It was armor designed to look like evening wear. The rich black silk crepe hugged her athletic figure, showing off the results of years of swimming and gym work she had taken up after her marriage began failing. The off-the-shoulder design highlighted her elegant neck and collarbones, while the midi-length skirt struck the perfect balance between sophistication and allure. As Diana prepared for the evening, her personal protection officer noticed her unusual calm. She wasn't nervous like she typically was before major public appearances. Instead, she seemed focused, almost businesslike in her preparation. She spent extra time on her makeup, ensuring her eyes would photograph perfectly. She chose simple jewelry, letting the dress speak for itself. Every detail was considered, every choice deliberate. The ride to the gallery gave Diana time to think about how dramatically her life had changed. When she had first worn designer gowns as a new princess, they had been chosen for her by palace staff who understood royal protocol better than fashion. She had been dressed like a doll, beautiful but controlled. Tonight, she had chosen every element of her appearance herself, and the difference was obvious to anyone who looked. Her bodyguard opened the car door and the wall of camera flashes hit her like a physical force. But Diana didn't hesitate. She stepped out gracefully, her head held high, and walked toward the gallery entrance with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The photographers shouted her name, desperate for the perfect shot, but she took her time, allowing them to capture the image that would define this moment in royal history. Inside the gallery, the atmosphere was electric. Word had already begun spreading among the guests about Diana's appearance. Cell phones weren't common in 1994, but news traveled fast through London's social circles. People who hadn't planned to watch Charles's interview suddenly found themselves curious about what the prince had to say while his wife was making her own statement across town. Diana worked the room like a professional, but those closest to her could sense the emotion beneath her polished exterior. This wasn't just about looking beautiful or even about revenge. This was about reclaiming her identity after years of having it defined by others. The dress was her declaration of independence, her announcement that she would no longer be a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The evening was just beginning, but already Diana knew she had achieved something important. The dress was working exactly as she had hoped. In a few hours, newspapers around the world would have their front pages. Charles's interview would be overshadowed by images of his wife looking absolutely radiant at a London gala. The palace would spend days trying to manage the story, but the image would speak louder than any words. As she moved through the gallery, admiring the artwork and chatting with other guests, Diana carried herself with a new kind of power. She had learned to use fashion as communication, style as strategy. Tonight was proof that she had mastered both. The revenge dress was working its magic, and Diana was finally telling her own story. The morning after the Serpentine Gallery Gala, Diana woke to find her face on the front page of every major newspaper in Britain. The images were stunning. The dress had photographed even better than she had hoped, the black silk appearing to shimmer under the camera flashes. Headlines screamed about her beauty, her confidence, her apparent happiness on the same night her husband had confessed his adultery to the nation. Diana sat in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, surrounded by newspapers and magazines. Her press secretary had already fielded dozens of calls from international media outlets wanting to know about the dress, about her state of mind, about her plans for the future. The palace's official response was minimal, but the pictures told their own story. While Charles had appeared uncomfortable and defensive during his television interview, Diana looked radiant and in control. The designer Christina Stambolian was equally surprised by the reaction. Her phone had been ringing since dawn, with orders from women wanting their own version of the dress. Fashion editors were calling it a masterpiece of strategic dressing. The simple black dress had become a symbol of female empowerment overnight. Stambolian had created beautiful clothes for years, but nothing had ever generated this kind of global attention. Behind the scenes at Buckingham Palace, senior courtiers were furious. The Queen's private secretary made several angry phone calls to Diana's staff, demanding explanations for what he called a calculated attempt to upstage the prince. Palace officials had spent weeks managing the publicity around Charles's interview, trying to control the narrative about his confession. Diana had destroyed their careful planning with a single outfit choice. But Diana felt no guilt about the palace's anger. For 13 years, she had followed their rules, worn their approved clothes, appeared at their chosen events, and smiled when they told her to smile. She had been the perfect royal wife while her husband conducted his affair with increasing boldness. The revenge dress was her way of saying that the old rules no longer applied to her. Fashion historians would later mark this moment as a turning point in Diana's style evolution. Before the revenge dress, her clothing choices had been safe, appropriate, designed to complement rather than compete. After this night, her fashion became bolder, more personal, more clearly her own choice rather than committee decisions. She had discovered the power of using clothes to control her public image. The dress itself had an interesting backstory that few people knew at the time. Christina Stambolian had shown Diana several designs during their first meeting in 1991. The princess had been drawn to the black off-shoulder dress immediately, but her royal dresser had quietly discouraged the choice. Too revealing, too dramatic, too likely to cause controversy. Diana had agreed at the time, choosing more conservative options instead. But Stambolian had kept the design, hoping Diana might change her mind eventually. The designer understood that fashion could be armor as well as decoration. She had grown up in Australia watching how clothes could transform not just how others saw you, but how you saw yourself. When Diana finally called about the dress in June 1994, Stambolian knew exactly what the princess was planning. The fitting had taken place in secret at Diana's private apartment. Stambolian arrived with just the dress and a few basic accessories, no entourage or assistants. Diana tried on the outfit and stood in front of her full-length mirror for a long time, studying her reflection from every angle. The woman looking back at her was not the shy kindergarten teacher who had stumbled into royal life. This was someone new, someone stronger. International media coverage of the dress was unprecedented. American television networks devoted entire segments to analyzing Diana's appearance. French fashion magazines declared her the most stylish woman in the world. Italian newspapers printed multiple pages of photographs from different angles. The dress had transformed a London charity gala into a global fashion moment. More importantly for Diana, the coverage focused entirely on her strength and beauty rather than her victim status. For months, the British press had portrayed her as a wronged wife, sympathetic but ultimately powerless. The revenge dress changed that narrative completely. Here was a woman taking control, making choices, sending clear messages about her independence and confidence. The psychological impact of wearing the dress was as important as its visual effect. Diana had spent years feeling diminished by her failing marriage, believing that somehow Charles's affair reflected her own inadequacies. The response to the dress proved otherwise. The world saw her as beautiful, powerful, and admirable. The feedback helped her begin to see herself the same way. Fashion experts noted the dress's perfect construction and fit. Every seam was precisely placed to enhance Diana's figure. The neckline drew attention to her face and elegant neck. The length showed off her long legs without being inappropriate. The color made her blonde hair and blue eyes appear even more striking. This wasn't just a beautiful dress. It was a dress designed specifically to make Diana look her absolute best. The timing of wearing the dress was equally brilliant. Diana knew that Charles's confession would dominate the news cycle, but she also knew that compelling images could compete with any story. By appearing at a high-profile event looking stunning while her husband admitted his failures on television, she created a visual contrast that spoke louder than words. The revenge dress strategy was so successful that other women in similar situations began copying the approach. Fashion magazines started featuring articles about power dressing after divorce announcements. Designers began creating what they called independence collections for women starting new chapters in their lives. Diana had accidentally started a movement. Within the royal family, reactions were mixed. Some younger royals privately admired Diana's courage in taking control of her image. Others, particularly older family members, saw her fashion choice as inappropriate and attention-seeking. The Queen Mother reportedly made several disapproving comments about modern women who used their appearance to make political statements. But public opinion was overwhelmingly positive. Polls taken in the days following the gala showed Diana's popularity ratings actually increasing despite her husband's very public confession of adultery. Women particularly identified with her situation and admired her response. The dress had transformed her from victim to victor in the court of public opinion. Diana began receiving letters from women around the world who had seen the photographs and felt inspired by her confidence. Some shared their own stories of leaving difficult relationships. Others simply wanted to thank her for showing them what strength could look like. The dress had become more than fashion. It had become a symbol of female resilience. The success of the revenge dress also changed how Diana approached her public appearances. She began working more closely with fashion designers, understanding that her clothes were a form of communication with the public. Every outfit became an opportunity to send a message about her mood, her priorities, her evolution as an independent woman. Christina Stambolian found herself transformed overnight from a respected but relatively unknown designer into an international fashion star. Orders poured in from around the world. Magazine editors wanted to interview her about the creative process behind the dress. Fashion students studied her work as an example of how clothes could make political statements. The dress itself was carefully preserved after that famous night. Diana understood its historical significance and had it professionally cleaned and stored. She would later tell friends that looking at the dress reminded her of the moment she stopped being afraid of what other people thought about her choices. It marked the beginning of her journey toward true independence. 3 years passed since that memorable night at the Serpentine Gallery, and Diana's transformation from royal wife to independent woman continued to fascinate the world. The revenge dress had been just the beginning of her journey toward complete personal freedom. By 1997, she had established herself as a global humanitarian, a devoted mother, and a fashion icon who used her style to support causes she believed in. The dress itself had taken on a life beyond its original purpose. Fashion museums had begun reaching out to Diana's representatives, hoping to acquire the iconic garment for their collections. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London was particularly interested, recognizing the dress as a significant piece of both fashion and social history. But Diana kept it in her private wardrobe, occasionally taking it out to remember the courage it had given her that night. Meanwhile, her relationship with fashion had evolved significantly. Where once she had dressed to please others or avoid controversy, now she chose clothes that reflected her personality and supported her work. When she visited landmine victims in Angola, she wore simple, practical clothing that showed respect for their situation. When she attended glittering charity galas, she chose gowns that would photograph well and generate maximum publicity for her causes. Christina Stambolian remained in Diana's circle of preferred designers, creating several more memorable pieces for the princess. Their relationship had deepened beyond just fashion into genuine friendship. Stambolian understood Diana's need to use clothing as both protection and communication. The designer often worked late into the night perfecting details that would help Diana feel confident and beautiful. The media's obsession with Diana's style choices continued unabated. Every public appearance generated hundreds of photographs and countless column inches analyzing what she wore and what it might mean. Fashion editors treated her clothing choices like tea leaves, searching for clues about her emotional state, her relationships, her future plans. The revenge dress had taught them that Diana's outfits often contained deliberate messages. Behind the glamorous public image, Diana remained deeply committed to her humanitarian work. She had learned to use her fashion choices strategically to support these efforts. When she wanted to draw attention to her AIDS charity work, she would choose particularly striking outfits for related events, ensuring maximum media coverage. The photographs of her in beautiful clothes would run alongside stories about important causes. Her sons, William and Harry, were now teenagers who watched their mother's public life with growing understanding. They had been too young to fully comprehend the revenge dress moment when it happened. But as they matured, they began to appreciate how their mother had used fashion to regain control of her narrative. They were proud of her strength and independence. The divorce from Charles had been finalized in 1996, officially ending their 15-year marriage. Diana had negotiated a substantial settlement that ensured her financial independence and guaranteed her role in her sons' lives. She no longer needed to consider palace protocol when making fashion choices. Every outfit was now entirely her own decision, reflecting her personal taste and strategic thinking. The fashion industry had embraced Diana completely by this time. Designers competed for the honor of dressing her, knowing that her wearing their creations would generate global attention. Versace, Armani, Lacroix, and other major fashion houses regularly sent her their latest designs. But Diana remained loyal to designers who had supported her during difficult times, particularly Christina Stambolian. Her personal style had matured significantly since the revenge dress night. While she still appreciated dramatic pieces for special occasions, her everyday wardrobe had become more relaxed and accessible. She wanted to appear approachable to the people she worked with in her charity efforts. The revenge dress had given her confidence, but wisdom had taught her when to tone things down. Photography of the revenge dress had become some of the most valuable images in fashion history. The pictures were licensed repeatedly for books, documentaries, and magazine retrospectives about Diana's life and style. Each use generated income for the photographers, but more importantly, kept the story alive for new generations discovering Diana's legacy. Fashion students around the world studied the revenge dress as an example of strategic dressing. Universities offered entire courses on how public figures could use clothing to communicate messages and control narratives. The dress had become a case study in the intersection of fashion, media, and personal empowerment. Diana's confidence in using fashion as a tool had inspired other women facing difficult circumstances. Letters continued arriving at Kensington Palace from women who had worn their own revenge dresses to reclaim power in their lives. Some had worn bold outfits to divorce proceedings. Others had chosen striking clothes for job interviews after being fired. Diana's example had given them courage to use fashion as armor. The economic impact of Diana's fashion choices had become substantial by 1997. Designers she wore regularly saw significant increases in sales. Fashion magazines featuring Diana on their covers consistently outsold other issues. The Diana effect was a recognized phenomenon in the fashion industry, where her endorsement of a particular style or designer could transform businesses. Museums worldwide had begun developing exhibitions about fashion as communication, often featuring sections about Diana's strategic use of clothing. The revenge dress was always prominently featured in these displays, recognized as a turning point moment when fashion became political statement. Art historians were beginning to categorize the dress alongside other culturally significant garments. Her relationship with the media had evolved as well. Diana had learned to work with photographers and editors, understanding that positive coverage of her fashion choices helped promote her charitable work. She would sometimes tip off friendly photographers about particularly meaningful outfit choices, ensuring her messages reached the widest possible audience. The technical aspects of the revenge dress continued to fascinate fashion experts years later. The construction was flawless, with hand-sewn details that were invisible to cameras but added to the dress's drape and movement. Christina Stambolian had used techniques learned from couture masters to create a garment that would look perfect from any angle under any lighting conditions. Diana's fashion legacy was being secured during this period. Major fashion magazines were beginning to plan special issues devoted entirely to her style evolution. The revenge dress would anchor these retrospectives, representing the moment when Diana transformed from royal wife to independent woman. Fashion historians were already comparing her influence to that of Jackie Kennedy and Audrey Hepburn. The psychological transformation that began with wearing the revenge dress had continued throughout Diana's post-divorce life. She had developed genuine confidence in her own judgment about fashion and everything else. The dress had been a catalyst, but Diana's own strength and intelligence had driven her continued growth as a person and public figure. Young women who had been children during Diana's royal marriage were now old enough to appreciate the sophistication of her fashion choices. They saw her as a role model who had used style to express independence and strength. The revenge dress represented everything they hoped to achieve in their own lives, the courage to be themselves regardless of what others expected. The summer of 1997 brought unexpected changes to Diana's life. Her relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed had captured international attention, and once again, her fashion choices were being scrutinized for clues about her happiness and future plans. The revenge dress remained in her wardrobe, a reminder of her journey from vulnerable royal wife to confident independent woman, but new chapters were being written in her ongoing story. During these final months, Diana's appreciation for the revenge dress had evolved into something deeper than nostalgia. She would sometimes show it to close friends, explaining how wearing it had changed her understanding of her own power. The dress had taught her that she could control how the world saw her, that she didn't have to accept other people's definitions of who she should be. Christina Stambolian received a call from Diana in early August 1997. The princess wanted to discuss plans for autumn charity events and the outfits she might wear. They talked about how much Diana's style had evolved since that famous night at the Serpentine Gallery. The designer was struck by how confident Diana had become, how clearly she now understood the relationship between fashion and communication. The fashion world was preparing for another autumn season with Diana as its unofficial queen. Magazines were planning covers featuring her latest looks. Designers were sketching pieces they hoped she might wear. The revenge dress had established Diana as someone whose fashion choices carried weight and meaning, and that influence had only grown stronger over time. Her sons remained fascinated by their mother's transformation. William, now 15, had recently asked Diana about the revenge dress and the night she wore it. She explained the strategic thinking behind the choice, how she had used fashion to reclaim her narrative when others tried to define her story. The conversation helped him understand the complexities of public life and the tools available for managing it. Fashion historians were already beginning to document Diana's influence on late 20th century style. The revenge dress represented a pivotal moment when fashion became clearly political, when clothing choices were understood as deliberate communication. Academic papers were being written about the sociological implications of Diana's strategic dressing. The dress itself had become part of fashion folklore. Young designers studied photographs of it, trying to understand the technical details that made it so effective. The simplicity was deceptive. Every element had been carefully considered to create maximum impact. Fashion schools used it as an example of how restraint and precision could be more powerful than elaborate decoration. Media coverage of Diana's fashion choices had reached new levels of sophistication by 1997. Fashion editors no longer just described what she wore. They analyzed why she might have chosen particular pieces for specific events. The revenge dress had demonstrated that Diana's outfits often contained deliberate messages, and journalists had learned to decode these sartorial communications. Diana's charitable work continued to benefit from her fashion expertise. When she wanted to draw attention to her anti-landmine campaign, she chose outfits that would photograph dramatically against the backgrounds where she worked. The revenge dress had taught her that compelling images could communicate more effectively than speeches or written statements. The international fashion community had embraced Diana completely by this time. Paris couture houses competed for her attention. American designers sent their most exclusive pieces for her consideration. The revenge dress had established her credibility as someone who understood fashion's power, making designers eager to be associated with her message and influence. Her personal relationship with clothing had become healthier and more confident. Where once she had worried constantly about whether her choices were appropriate or attractive, now she dressed primarily to please herself and support her work. The revenge dress marked the beginning of this evolution toward genuine self-confidence and personal style. The economic impact of Diana's fashion influence had reached extraordinary levels. A single photograph of her wearing a particular designer's piece could generate millions in sales. The revenge dress had established the template for this phenomenon, proving that Diana's fashion choices could have serious business consequences. Fashion magazines were preparing special Diana issues for autumn 1997, many featuring retrospectives of her style evolution since the divorce. The revenge dress would be prominently featured in these publications, recognized as the moment when Diana's fashion became intentionally strategic and personally meaningful. Behind the scenes, Diana's wardrobe management had become increasingly sophisticated. She worked with a small team of stylists and fashion advisors who helped her choose outfits that would support her goals for each appearance. The revenge dress had taught them all that every choice mattered, that fashion was a form of communication requiring careful consideration. Young women around the world continued to find inspiration in Diana's fashion journey. The revenge dress represented the possibility of transformation, the idea that changing how you dressed could change how you felt about yourself and how others perceived you. University students wrote thesis papers about the sociological implications of Diana's strategic styling. The photography market for Diana's fashion images had become extremely valuable by 1997. Pictures of the revenge dress commanded premium prices whenever they were licensed for publication. The images had become iconic representations of female empowerment and personal transformation, valuable both as fashion photography and historical documentation. Fashion critics had begun comparing Diana's influence to that of previous style icons like Grace Kelly and Jackie Kennedy. But Diana's impact was different because it was more deliberately strategic. The revenge dress represented a new kind of fashion influence, where clothing choices were openly acknowledged as political and personal statements rather than simple aesthetic decisions. Christina Stambolian's career had been transformed by her association with Diana. The revenge dress had made her internationally famous, leading to opportunities she could never have imagined. But more than fame, the dress had represented the beginning of a meaningful creative partnership between designer and client, built on mutual understanding and respect. The dress remained carefully preserved in Diana's wardrobe, occasionally brought out for special photography sessions or private viewings with friends. Diana understood its historical significance and took care to maintain it properly. She sometimes wondered what would eventually happen to the dress, whether it might someday be displayed in a museum where future generations could appreciate its significance. During quiet moments in late summer 1997, Diana would sometimes reflect on how much her life had changed since that night at the Serpentine Gallery. The revenge dress had been a catalyst for transformation that continued to unfold. She had learned to use fashion as a tool for communication and self-expression, skills that had served her well in her independence. The fashion industry was preparing for autumn collections with Diana as their unofficial muse. Designers created pieces hoping she might choose them for upcoming appearances. The revenge dress had established her as someone whose fashion choices mattered beyond simple celebrity, someone whose style carried genuine cultural and political weight in ways that continued to influence how fashion was understood and appreciated. The tragic events of August 31, 1997, transformed the revenge dress from a personal symbol of empowerment into a piece of global cultural history. When Diana died in the Paris car crash, the fashion world lost not just a muse and icon, but a woman who had revolutionized how clothing could be used as communication, therapy, and political statement. In the immediate aftermath of her death, fashion magazines around the world prepared special memorial issues. The revenge dress appeared in almost every publication, recognized as the moment when Diana transformed from victim to victor, from royal wife to independent woman. The image of her walking confidently into the Serpentine Gallery became one of the most reproduced photographs in fashion history. Christina Stambolian was devastated by the loss of both a client and friend. The designer gave several interviews about creating the revenge dress, emphasizing Diana's courage in choosing to wear it despite palace disapproval. Stambolian revealed that Diana had called the dress her freedom outfit in private conversations, crediting it with helping her discover her own strength and independence. The dress itself became the subject of intense speculation after Diana's death. Fashion historians argued that it should be preserved in a major museum as an example of how clothing could change history. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London expressed strong interest in acquiring it for their fashion collection. The dress had transcended mere celebrity fashion to become a symbol of female empowerment. Within weeks of Diana's funeral, fashion schools worldwide were developing courses that used the revenge dress as a case study in strategic styling. Students learned how Diana had used fashion to control media narratives, communicate personal messages, and support her charitable work. The dress became required study material for anyone interested in fashion's intersection with media and politics. The economic impact of Diana's fashion influence became even more apparent after her death. Auction houses reported unprecedented interest in clothing worn by the princess. The revenge dress, though not available for sale, was valued by fashion experts at hundreds of thousands of pounds, not just for its construction, but for its cultural significance. Major museums began developing comprehensive exhibitions about Diana's fashion legacy. The revenge dress was always the centerpiece of these displays, presented with detailed information about the circumstances that led to its creation and the impact it had on both Diana's life and broader fashion culture. Visitors often spent long periods studying the dress and reading about its significance. Fashion photographers who had captured Diana wearing the revenge dress found their images becoming increasingly valuable. The photographs were licensed repeatedly for books, documentaries, and memorial publications. Several photographers reported that images from that night at the Serpentine Gallery had become the most commercially successful pictures of their careers. The story of the revenge dress began appearing in university textbooks about fashion history, media studies, and women's studies. Academics wrote extensively about how Diana had used clothing to challenge traditional expectations about royal behavior and women's roles in public life. The dress became a symbol of the late 20th century's changing attitudes toward female agency. Young designers frequently cited the revenge dress as inspiration for their own work. Fashion students learned to consider not just how clothes looked, but what messages they might communicate. Diana's strategic approach to fashion had influenced an entire generation of designers to think more deeply about the social and political implications of their creations. The technical details of the dress continued to fascinate fashion experts years after Diana's death. Christina Stambolian shared construction details with fashion historians, explaining the hand-sewn elements and careful tailoring that made the dress photograph so beautifully. Fashion students studied these techniques as examples of how perfect construction could enhance a garment's impact. International fashion weeks began featuring tributes to Diana's style, with many designers creating pieces inspired by the revenge dress. The simple black off-shoulder silhouette became a recurring theme in collections, though few achieved the perfect balance of elegance and drama that made the original so effective. The dress's influence on popular culture extended far beyond fashion. It was referenced in films, television shows, books, and songs as a symbol of female empowerment. The phrase, revenge dress, entered common vocabulary, used to describe any outfit chosen specifically to make a powerful personal statement during difficult circumstances. Women around the world continued to write letters to Diana's estate about how the revenge dress had inspired their own lives. Many described wearing their own revenge dresses during divorces, job interviews, or other challenging situations. Diana's example had given them permission to use fashion as a tool for confidence and communication. Fashion magazines regularly featured retrospectives about the revenge dress on significant anniversaries of Diana's death or the original event. These articles often included new interviews with people who had been present that night, adding details to the story and keeping the dress's significance alive for new generations. The preservation of the actual dress became a matter of significant interest. Conservation experts from major museums offered their services to ensure the garment would survive for future generations. The dress was professionally cleaned, stored in climate-controlled conditions, and occasionally examined to monitor its condition. In 2024, nearly 30 years after that memorable night at the Serpentine Gallery, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris announced plans for a special exhibition celebrating Princess Diana's fashion legacy. The centerpiece would be the revenge dress, borrowed from Diana's estate for the first time since her death. The announcement generated international excitement and booking requests from around the world. The Paris exhibition would present the dress alongside detailed documentation of its creation, the circumstances that led to Diana wearing it, and its lasting impact on fashion and culture. Interactive displays would allow visitors to understand the strategic thinking behind Diana's fashion choices and see how the dress influenced subsequent generations of women. Preparation for the Paris display required extensive conservation work. The dress was carefully examined by experts who marveled at its construction and preservation. Despite being nearly 3 decades old, the silk remained lustrous, and the seams were perfect, testament to both Christina Stambolian's craftsmanship and the care with which the dress had been maintained. The exhibition opening was planned as a celebration of Diana's life and her revolutionary approach to fashion. Fashion historians, designers, and women who had been inspired by Diana's example would attend the opening ceremony. The revenge dress would finally receive the museum recognition it had earned as one of the most significant garments in fashion history. As visitors to the Paris Museum would learn, the revenge dress represented more than just a beautiful outfit or even a clever response to personal betrayal. It embodied the moment when one woman decided to stop letting others define her story and began using every tool at her disposal, including fashion, to communicate her own truth. The dress had given Diana her voice, and through museum display, it would continue inspiring others to find theirs. The legacy of the revenge dress extended far beyond its museum display. It had changed how people understood fashion's power, how women thought about clothing as communication, and how personal style could become political statement. In the end, Diana's most lasting contribution to fashion was not any particular outfit, but the idea that what we wear can express who we are and what we believe, that clothing can be armor, art, and activism all at once.